And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless.
Okay, we are live today. We've got an exciting debate for you guys. We've got Dr. Ron Garret, who's gracious enough to give us his time yet again for sure a debate to remember. We've got NephilimFree. Both of these debaters are seasoned. They've had plenty of debates. So, yeah, like I said, this is going to be one to remember. Today we are debating evolution or creation. What does the evidence support? We did a coin flip pre-debate, so we've determined that Dr. Ron Garret is going to start. We're going to have flexible openings, no more than 10 minutes, followed by a discussion portion. I'll make sure that it's going respectful, but both these debaters are always respectful in debates, so there shouldn't be any issues. We'll wrap it up with a brief concluding statement and some question and answer from the audience. So make sure you're tagging myself. I'll save as many questions as I can, and we'll have a good Q&A. But before we get started, as always, let's break the ice. Gentlemen, thanks for giving us your time today for this very important debate. So why don't we start with Ron? Ron, thanks for being here.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm not sure how seasoned I am. This is only the fourth time I've done this. But I'm Ron Garret. I am a semi-retired software engineer, and I study Young Earth Creationism as a hobby.
Well, I guess because we've had you, I think all four of those debates then have been with us.
That's right. Nobody else wants me.
Well, we love you, Ron. You're always welcome here. And Neph, thanks for being here. How you doing today?
Oh, and I'm looking forward to it. Ron seems like a delightful fella. I'm going to enjoy this a lot. Debate is one of my favorite hobby, and I just love doing it. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks to you guys for moderating this thing, and it's going to be fun.
Awesome. My pleasure. One announcement. So make sure, guys, you mark it on your calendar. Next week, we have Dr. Garret is going to be back with us Thursday, 2 p.m. EST, I believe it is. Yes, 2 p.m. EST. We've got Paul Price. He's a speaker from CMI, Creation Ministries. They are going to be discussing genetic entropy. So one of our favorite topics. Be there for that one. That's going to be a lot of fun. So enough for me. Once again, thanks for being here, guys. We're going to hand it over to Ron for his roughly 10-minute opening, whatever you need, no rush. And then, kind of go from there. So Ron, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay, so the topic for today was, does the evidence support creation or evolution? I'm taking the evolution side. The question of whether the evidence supports evolution was actually settled a very long time ago, over 150 years ago, not long after Darwin published Origin of Species. So it was settled long before DNA was discovered. It was settled before computers were discovered. I don't mean to say that it was settled for all time. Scientific knowledge is always tentative and contingent on the discovery of new data. So it's possible that somebody will discover something that will disprove evolution. But evolution at the moment is one of the best confirmed scientific theories of all time. All of the additional evidence that has accumulated over the last 150 years since the question was initially settled overwhelmingly supports evolution. And today there is so much of it piled up over the years that I couldn't possibly cover it all even in an hour, let alone the 10 minutes I have for this opening statement. Fortunately, we don't actually need to dive too deeply into the weeds to see that what I've just said is true. There are some overarching scientific principles that let us sweep away entire categories of argument without having to dig into the details. For example, if you claim to have invented a perpetual motion machine, I don't have to look at the details of your design to know that you are almost certainly wrong. The reason for this is that there's this overarching scientific principle called the second law of thermodynamics. It's so important and so basic that scientists usually just refer to it simply as the second law, and everyone knows what they're talking about. One of the consequences of the second law is that it's impossible to build a perpetual motion machine. Now, the second law might be wrong. It's based on nothing other than observation, and the underlying reason for it is still a bit of a mystery. People still argue about it, but what they don't argue about is whether or not it is true. No one has ever demonstrated a violation of the second law, and so your perpetual motion machine design is very unlikely to be the first. And I can know all of this without even looking at your design. There are some perpetual motion machine designs that seem intuitively like they ought to work. And figuring out why they don't can be an engaging intellectual exercise, but it's no more than that. Perpetual motion machine designers are universally regarded as crackpots, and rightly so. It's the same situation for creationism. The scientific consensus is absolutely rock solid on the side of evolution. That's a fact that even creationists don't deny. So if evolution is wrong, that means that the overwhelming majority of the scientific establishment has got it wrong and has gotten it wrong for over 150 years. If you want to argue that the evidence does not support evolution, then it is incumbent on you not just to explain why you think the evidence is wrong, but also to explain how and why this happened, how and why the establishment has gotten it so badly wrong for so long, and why it continues even in the face of concerted efforts by creationists to correct the situation. And you have to explain why mainstream science continues to make progress and produce useful results like vaccines and antibiotics, despite the fact that all of these scientists, according to you, have got this fundamental question so badly wrong. I've never heard a creationist even make a dent in that argument. Kent Hovind seemed to think that it's some kind of a conspiracy. When I asked him about it, he went on some kind of a rant about North Korea that made absolutely no sense to me. Maybe you have a better explanation. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. Anyway, I've been studying creationist arguments for quite a while now, and they all seem to fall in one of three categories. The first is what I call backfitting the Bible. Creationist arguments don't seem to start with the evidence. They start with the Bible. Again, Kent Hovind, I go back to him because he's the one I debated most recently. To his credit, is front and center about this. He always opens by saying that he believes that the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate. And then he spends the rest of the time explaining how he manages to reconcile that belief with the fact that the evidence is overwhelmingly against the Bible. I mean, think about it. It has to be that way, or we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. If the evidence supported the Bible, then everyone would just agree that the Bible is true and we'd be done. The only reason anyone doubts that the Bible is the inerrant word of God is because its claims are in apparent conflict with the evidence. So creationists put a lot of effort into figuring out how to explain away these apparent conflicts. The second category of creationist argument is what I call the gotcha argument. They'll point to a scientific paper and say that this result proves that evolution can't possibly have happened the way science says it did. These are analogous to the perpetual motion machines whose design flaws are not immediately obvious. It can be a worthwhile exercise to go down one of these rabbit holes, and every now and then I do. Unsurprisingly, I've never found a gotcha argument that held up to even the most amateurish level of scrutiny. In fact, most of the time the person raising the argument folds before I even have a chance to call their bluff. My first debate here was with John Maddox, and at the end he said he had these papers that proved that evolution weren't true, and he promised to send them to me, and the last debate, I called him out on it, saying that he hadn't sent them to me yet, and he still hasn't. And John, if you're listening, yes, I'm going to be calling you out on this until you either deliver or concede that you were blowing smoke. The third category of argument, and this is the most popular one nowadays, and one that I've heard you raise on your YouTube channel, is the argument for incredulity. And it goes like this. Look at how complicated life is. I can't imagine how this incredible complexity could possibly have arisen without a designer. Therefore, there must have been a designer. And then you go on to say, and therefore the designer must be the God of the Bible. There's so many things wrong with this that I hardly know where to begin to unpack it. For starters, it's absolutely not the case that simply because you can't imagine how something could have happened without a designer, that this proves that it could not have happened without a designer. All it proves is that your imagination has limits. The history of science is chock full of things that people could not imagine could ever be explained naturalistically that were eventually explained naturalistically. People used to think that the heavens operated under different laws of physics than the Earth. How else could you explain, for example, the fact that the moon doesn't fall down and crash into the Earth? And yet, the heavens do operate under the same laws of physics as we do that we now understand. This argument is often conflated with the fine-tuning argument, which goes something like this. Look at how finely tuned biological systems are. If anything about them were tweaked differently, they wouldn't work, and therefore they must have been designed. And while it's true that most design systems are fine-tuned, this again it's not the case that all fine-tuned systems are designed. In fact, even systems that are actually designed, there's often a lot of fine-tuning that takes place using automation and not human intelligence. And some of these techniques are even called genetic algorithms, and they are literally evolution in action. So even if God created us, there's absolutely no reason to believe that he didn't use evolution to do it. And finally, even if I concede that we're designed, I don't, but let's suppose, then you're still a very long way from proving that the God of the Bible is the one who did the designing. It could have been intelligent aliens, for example. So all of these hypotheses are things that I'm happy to entertain and discuss. I don't know which of these you would rather focus on, but nonetheless, the burden of proof is on you because the evidence is overwhelmingly on my side. Like I said when I started, it is overwhelmingly on my side, and the evidence for that is the consensus in the scientific community. Either the scientific community is right about the evidence, or we've made this one of the greatest mistakes in the history of human intellectual endeavor, and you have to explain how and why that happened.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that opening statement there, Ron. Clear, concise. Let's move on to Brother Neff. Whenever you're ready, if you got some slides you want to show as well, we'll make sure that Praise has the screen shared for you. And for the audience, make sure you're tagging me with questions. So awesome. Go ahead, Neff, whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah, I do have something to share. There it is. So let me see. So evolution became a laughable myth in the 20th century because of the advent of modern science. It's an idea that was born from secular humanism, put forth by a man who became angry at God because his favorite daughter had suffered for a year with stomach cancer and died a terrible and painful death, and so became very angry at God. Evolutionism is denial of science. It's a philosophy. It never was science. It was born in a day when men rode horses and lighted streets with oil lamps. Today we have 20th century and 21st century modern science. To be an evolutionist today is to actively be a denialist of modern science. Evolutionists will look at things biological and declare there's no reason to believe they are designed. But the truth is, that's a completely bogus statement. We have every reason to believe that biological systems are designed. For example, what you see on the screen is the helicase machinery that duplicates the DNA molecule. It's a set of complex mechanical levers and clamps that form the DNA molecule as it spins, one strand forward, one strand backward. The DNA molecule is spinning at the speed of the turbine in a jet engine as it comes out of this machinery. It's systematic, it's prescribed, and it's designed. If you look at that and say that's not designed, there's something wrong with your thinking. Evolutionists deny all manner of things. They'll look at this pile of dirt in the middle of a field and admit that rationale tells them somebody dumped that there. They'll admit that was designed. But they'll look at this MACPF ring of a massive number of amino acids specified in exacting locations to produce this ring, the purpose of which is to pop a hole in the membrane of a bacteria and allow toxins to enter. This is produced by your immune system, by the way. And they'll declare that's not designed. You see, the reason they do this is because they don't want evolution to not be true. They don't want creation to be true. It's not because evolution is logical or rational. It's because they can't stand the idea of there being a creator. That's all there is to that. Now, there are many things that prove evolution and discredit evolution. One of them are the 10 laws of nature about information. 20th century science proved that DNA is a four-dimensional package of strand hopping, reverse and forward reading, self-correcting, highly specified, complex, specific, functional, algorithmic, linguistic, semiotic information that is highly compressed. Information, linguistics, and algorithms cannot be produced by anything other than intelligence. There are 10 laws of nature about DNA, about information rather, that prove to us that DNA is information, and information can only come from an intelligence. Therefore, evolution is false, and intelligent design is a fact. One of them is anything material such as physical or chemical processes cannot create something non-material. Information is a non-material fundamental entity and not a property of matter. Information requires a material medium for storage and transmission. Information cannot arise from statistical processes. There can be no information without a code. No thought or idea can be shared without a code. All codes result from an intentional choice and agreement between a sender and a recipient. The determination of meaning for and from a set of symbols is a mental process that requires intelligence. There can be no new information without an intelligent, purposeful sender. Any given chain of information can be traced back to an intelligent source. And information comprises the non-material foundation for all technological systems, works of art, and biological systems. Now, there's some things we need to understand about that fact because DNA is information. Since DNA is the code of information is clearly within the domain definition of information, we must conclude there is a sender. Since the density and complexity of DNA's encoded information is billions of times greater than man's present technology, we must conclude that the sender is supremely intelligent. Since the sender must have encoded the DNA information on the molecules, constructed the molecular biological machines to do the encoding, reading, and synthesizing of it, and designed the features of the organisms. We conclude the sender, therefore, is purposeful and supremely powerful since information is a non-material fundamental entity and cannot originate from material quantities. We conclude the sender must be a non-material component. Since the information is non-material fundamental entity and cannot be produced by material quantities, and the information also originates from man, we conclude that man's nature must have a non-material component as well. Since information is a non-material fundamental entity, and we must conclude that the assumption the universe is comprised solely of matter and energy is false. Since biological information originates only from an intelligent sender, and all theories of chemical and biological evolution require that information must originate solely from mass and energy alone, without a sender, we conclude that all theories or concepts of biological evolution are false. Now, anyone who disagrees with these laws of nature about information and conclusions must falsify them by demonstrating the initial origin of information from purely material processes. Therefore, the laws of nature about information have refuted the assumption of scientific materialism and the theories of chemical and biological evolution, and all philosophies or theories based on the assumption of scientific materialism, including chemical and biological evolution, are falsified by the laws of nature about information. So DNA proves to us that life is designed. That's just how it is. And this is something that modern evolutionists simply can't get on board with because their paradigm will not allow them. By the way, if you point to Shannon information, that's not going to work. DNA is not Shannon information. It's highly complex, specified, functional, and prescriptive information. Now, DNA also possesses algorithms. Algorithmic processes are abundant in the DNA. And algorithms are procedures which require forward thinking and planning and decision making. It's irrational to believe that molecules in motion can think about the future. Chemical interactions take place only in the present, not in the past, not in the future, only in the now. It's impossible, therefore, for material processes of chemicals which can only interact with each other if they are in immediate proximity to each other, and algorithms require that these molecules are interdependent with each other, vast distances away from each other on the DNA molecule. This kills evolution theory because DNA is information which operates algorithmically and semiotically. It's symbols which represent things. That aboutness and that non-physical symbolic representation is something that can only arise from intelligence. Therefore, not only information, but algorithms, genetic functional algorithms in DNA, kill evolution theory because they verify an intelligence was necessary to produce them. Nature cannot produce an algorithm. It comes only from intelligence, just like information. Genetic information is so highly compressed that a particular sequence of genes in the information in the DNA molecule of the human being produces 521 known different proteins because the information is overlapping and nested. It's information compression technology of a level that vastly exceeds man's best computer programming schemes. Man cannot create information that functions like DNA. Imagine writing CorelDraw.exe as a software programmer and then trying to write that program so that it can be read from the last line in that program to the first, and it produces a different program. We don't know how to do that, but God did it because that's how your DNA operates. Linguistic features of DNA are astonishing. It's now known that DNA possesses linguistics that are more complex than that of any spoken human language. They possess pause, start, stop, more, less, ignore, and many other instructions based on semiotics and linguistics. For example, here are some sources for that. If you doubt the things that I say, I'd be happy to go over those sources with you. Now, evolution allegedly occurs because of changes to allele frequency. The problem with that is changes to allele frequency cause genes to become recessive permanently, turning off of genes. The larger and more successful a population is, the less viable it is over time. That's why every species of life on this planet is devolving, not evolving. That's the opposite of what evolution requires. Evolution requires a continuous input of new genetic information. Changes to allele frequency continuously take away information. If you doubt that, I have sources for that. And all of them are secular. None of them are creationist. Well, one of them is. So the junk DNA paradigm has been killed by evolution. The fossil record never showed any evidence of transitional forms. Had evolution been true, there would be thousands upon thousands upon thousands of transitional forms living right this minute on the Earth. We can't find one. There are not any transitional forms in the fossil record either. If evolution had been true, as Duane Gish, the famous creationist paleontologist, pointed out, they would outnumber fully formed creatures by billions to one, and we can't find any. Even the famous Stephen Jay Gould, the world's most famous paleontologist, admitted numerous times the fossil record simply doesn't show the transition evolution requires. So my contention is science has killed evolution theory. Evolutionists are slow to adapt because their paradigm prevents them from acknowledging it. That concludes my opening.
Awesome. Great openings from the both of you guys. Now we're moving, of course, into the discussion portion, everybody's favorite part of the debate. As always, though, we want to keep it a free-flowing, organic dialogue where both debaters feel they are getting the time necessary to make and finish their points, of course. I'll try and stay out of it as much as possible and kind of just allow you guys to discuss the topic of creation or evolution and the points you both brought up in your opening statements. If necessary, I'll step in just to make sure that it's going smooth and respectful. Since Neph just ended his opening statement, we can allow Dr. Garret to start it off with a question or some points he'd like to address from Neph's opening. But yeah, the floor is all yours, gentlemen.
So Dan, did you want to kick this off?
Oh, I think Ron, you may be muted.
Oh, Ron,
Yeah,
I
was, but I was able to unmute myself.
No problem.
I gotta say, I was really impressed by your opening. I watched some of your videos and watched some other videos by people who had debated you and talking about you, and I was left from that with the expectation that you would be nowhere near as coherent and persuasive as you actually were. That was a very persuasive argument. In fact, I'm convinced. But
oh, thank you.
But there's still one.
We got work to do, Ron.
Well, no. So here's this one little niggling problem. Why isn't everybody else convinced? Why have you not taken this very cogent sounding argument? And it really is. It's a cogent sounding argument. Written it up as a paper and submitted it to a scientific journal and revolutionized science. You would go down in history as one of the greatest scientists that ever lived if you did that.
Yeah. So I've heard that from evolutionists many times. Why don't you publish in the peer-reviewed paper journals? Well, firstly, coming from me, they're not going to pay any attention to it. I don't have a PhD in biology or evolutionary biology or paleontology, and they're going to save some schmo from Mississippi and it's going in the trash can. I don't see why there should be any expectation that I would be able to publish a science paper. I have the intelligence, I think, and the knowledge to do it, but they're just not going to pay me any attention. I think it's a little bit ridiculous, Ron, to ask why I haven't published in the journals and overturned evolution. But I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. You being someone with a degree in computer science, you know what an algorithm is. Mm-hmm. Every computer programmer knows what an algorithm is, right? Yep. And algorithms arise only from intelligence. Algorithms...
That's not true.
Okay, we'll discuss that in a second. But algorithms include choice-making decisions and considering the future, setting a goal for future activities. Isn't that correct?
That depends on what you mean by goal. Goal is a very loaded term.
Well, the definition of an algorithm is a program or scheme for the purpose of achieving an intended goal. That's the very definition.
No, an algorithm is simply a procedure.
A procedure, that's what I meant to say.
For carrying out a computation.
Right, to find something.
No, not necessarily.
Well, that's certainly something in the dictionary.
Finding something that you can use, finding something is a I'm tripping over the word goal here. You can use algorithms to find things, for example, the solutions to mathematical problems, but that's not the only use for algorithms, and it's not the only kind of algorithm. There are algorithms that don't do anything apparently useful, and yet they are algorithms.
I've never heard of such a thing. Every algorithm that I've ever heard of is for the purpose of achieving something. In fact, that's the definition of it. Ron.
Well, most of them are that way because in
the dictionary, the definition of an algorithm includes a statement that there is an intended goal. So where do you get this idea that algorithms don't have a goal or an intended purpose?
I don't know what dictionary you're looking at, but let me just look it up here.
Well, probably all of them. Such as finding a common denominator, for example, that you're seeking something. It's not just something going on, and then if something happens, well, something happened.
Okay.
The purpose of the algorithm is to find the common.
Yeah. Okay. So here is what Wikipedia has to say about it. It's usually my go-to source for this sort of thing, at least initially. In mathematics and computer science, an algorithm is a finite sequence of well-defined computer implementable instructions, typically to solve a class of problems or to perform a computation. The word typically is crucial. The reason that it's typically for that is because implementing an algorithm requires some effort, and normally you're not going to put that effort in unless you have something you want to accomplish. And that's why most algorithms do accomplish some humans' goals, because most algorithms do come about by having some human design them. But that doesn't mean that all algorithms are that way, and it doesn't mean that all algorithms achieve some goal.
I think you're misrepresenting it. Where it says typically, they're not alluding that there are algorithms that are not produced by intelligence in any way or don't have a goal.
Okay, but there are.
The goal is typically this type of goal.
Typically, yes, but there are algorithms that are not produced by human intelligence.
Such as?
So there's a whole class of them. They're called genetic algorithms.
Okay.
And they are quite literally evolved. For neural networks, for example, is an example of such an algorithm. A neural network is an algorithm, but a neural network is not designed. It's generated by this process, which does not have intelligence as part of it.
So the problem here is that you're looking at something. Man can make an algorithm out of looking at different things that exist and build an algorithm out of their existence. That's not going to describe genetic information algorithms. Genetic algorithms are functional and prescriptive. They are activities, instructions for finding information and then utilizing it in the information of the DNA molecule. They're not just something going on, and if something happens, maybe all the better. They're actually looking for information that is hundreds, thousands, or millions of base pairs away on the DNA molecule for a purpose. They're instructions, and they're for an intended purpose. So you can't take the man looking at how many rocks fell down on this side of the mountain versus that one and the other side of the mountain, and then build an algorithm in his head from it and compare that to genetic information algorithms.
Okay, so you used two words in there that I'm not sure I know what they mean. Functional and prescriptive. What do you mean by that?
Well, genetic algorithms are functional. For example, the somatic mutation system in living things can build novel enzymes on the fly for the purpose of thwarting the activity of an invader into the body, and that algorithm that operates is the intended purpose of it is to make something. It is to make a novel enzyme.
Okay. Then what's the distinction between an algorithm and a chemical process?
Intentionality and function.
Intentionality? So here's another word you've just thrown into the mix that I don't know what it means. What does intentionality mean?
Well, it means there is something prescribed. There's something thought about in advance. A goal with an intention. You see, if chemical process were simply going on and various protein enzymes were being produced, you'd have just a random chance that an enzyme that would actually thwart the activity of a virus, or a bacteria, whatever be produced by the immune system.
Okay.
The immune system targets them by using specific information in the DNA to produce something that's functional. That's functionality. Algorithms require intelligence because they are produced by intelligent processes with an intended function in mind.
Okay, so it's
DNA
intention
operates that way.
And purpose. This all seems to be getting towards this question of purpose. So what is that purpose?
Well, let's go back. I gave you one example. Let's go back to the algorithm example, the description in Wikipedia. Let's consider that very description that you seem to pass off. In mathematics and computer science, an algorithm is a finite sequence. Finite, firstly. Somebody has already decided that it's not an infinite number of sequences, not a random. It can't just be anything. A finite number There's already somebody has laid down limitations as to how it's going to operate. And then it goes on, computer implemented instructions. To instruct requires intelligence. Non-intelligent matter bumping around doesn't instruct anything. And also typically to solve a class of problems, problem solving requires intelligence and forethought. So the very description of an algorithm that you provided from Wikipedia itself has all manner of intelligent design built right into it. So I don't get where you think that an algorithm, especially those that are prescriptive and functional in genetics, could possibly arise by unintelligent material processes. Information, linguistics, and algorithms, they all require mental processes, which are not chemical processes. They're non-physical. How do you address the non-physical?
Well, okay, the non-physical.
Matter has no intentionality. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I would not actually. So here's what I was trying to get to: this question of purpose. What is the purpose?
Well,
there is actually. You're kind of right. There is a purpose, but the purpose I don't think is what you think it is. The purpose is reproduction. So that is the key element that drives the evolutionary process and distinguishes it from other what you call non-material or purely materialistic processes. It's this fact that you can have self-reproducing systems. That is the interesting part of biology. And in fact, you can reproduce that in computers. So you can have self-reproducing algorithms. We call them computer viruses nowadays. They are quite literally undergoing Darwinian evolution. You can actually think of them as life forms. They're non-biological life forms. They reproduce and they undergo Darwinian evolution.
What you're calling evolution is somatic mutation, which is programmed. There are two types of mutation. There's random, undirected mutation, and there's programmed mutation. Somatic mutation is programmed. The program in the DNA of the organism intends for this to happen for a purpose. So that's not evolutionary processes, and it doesn't have anything to do with reproduction. You mentioned things like the second law of thermodynamics. You said consensus opinion. We can scratch that off the page. You said vaccines and antibiotics support evolution. But let me ask you this: if that's true, vaccines and antibiotics, the ability of bacteria to build immunity to a man-made substance. How does that change the structural design of a bacteria 1 iota so that we can say it's an evolutionary change?
It doesn't change the structural design. That's not how evolution works.
Then there won't be any evolution.
Sure there will. The way evolution works is through random mutation and natural selection. So the way that it produces change over the long run is by selecting out those random mutations that provide relative reproductive advantage to those organisms that have those particular mutations, while the others are at a relative disadvantage. And so those features that provide the ability to reproduce better will reproduce better and therefore become more numerous. It's almost a logical tautology.
Well, the problem then with that is, Ron, that doesn't demonstrate anything about evolution. That doesn't demonstrate evolutionary change. If organisms don't change in their structural design, there is no common ancestry. There is no evolution. If an organism remains essentially structurally the same in its design as it always was, there are no transitions, and there is no fundamentally new type of organism arise. Evolution requires structural design changes, and these changes, the vaccines, the ability of bacteria to build immunities to things doesn't change the structural design of the bacteria at all. Therefore,
I never said that vaccines change the structural design. I know you didn't. Where you get that from?
I know you didn't, but I'm pointing out that if a change doesn't move an organism towards becoming a fundamentally different type of organism, the organism remains fundamentally the same type, and there would be no tree of life, there would be no alleged transitions, there would be no such thing as evolution. All we'd have is the original created kinds. And
okay. So
And
you're talking about
antibiotic-
speciation here.
bacterial immunity doesn't cause that kind of change in any way.
I never
It
said
can't
that
be.
it did.
Well, you mentioned it as evidence that supports evolution.
I
How can
actually
it do that?
didn't, but it's okay because it does. But bacterial, the arising of, and I'm not sure it's immunity. It's usually it's antibiotic resistance. It's the classic example. But the what brings about the larger changes that we see in speciation and the creation of more complex organisms is the accumulation of these mutations over long periods of time. And specifically what happens in the case of speciation is not that one kind turns into another, but that you get enough diversity, and usually through geographic isolation, you get branching. And so it's not that one kind turns into another, it's that the natural random mutation produces enough variation, and then geographic diversity, geographic isolation causes those two isolated populations to change enough that they're no longer able to interbreed with each other. So they don't, it's not that one kind changes into another, it's one kind gives rise to two others that eventually diverge far enough that they can't interbreed. And you can actually see every stage of that process happening today.
Well, Ron, I agree that what you said happens, but all you're telling me is a story, and then you're making a leap. Thus, evolution happens.
No.
I'm
advancing a hypothesis.
None of what you described causes evolutionary change in organisms. The inability of one population of a lizard to breed with the other population doesn't cause structural design change. We don't observe that, so that the organism can be said to be moving towards something else. You're just giving me the story of evolution and expect me to make the leap off the cliff. I don't make that leap. I accept that organisms change. The problem is we don't observe the kinds of changes in living systems that would be required if evolution were true. You're telling me it's built in there somewhere, but we don't see it. So where is this evidence that organisms change in their structural design so that we can say worm-like creatures begat over millions of years with an accumulation of successive minuscule changes to produce creatures, arachnids and lizards and birds? That's what evolution requires. And the accumulation of small changes in the structural design of organisms, else they remain the same kind. Where's the evidence for that?
Okay, so when you say structural design, you mean literally the physical body. So like the physical, the overt gross differences between the way a worm looks and the way a spider looks, right? You mentioned worms and arachnids, right?
Isn't that what evolutionists claim takes place?
No, worms did not evolve into spiders.
No, I didn't say they did. No, I'm not saying they did. I'm saying there were worm-like creatures in the beginning, and millions of years later, there are all these other creatures. Nobody says worms evolved into spiders.
You said worm-like creatures evolved into
Right,
spiders.
that was what the first complex creatures on the Earth, according to evolutionists, at the bottom of the Cambrian, is worm-like animals. So, but the point of this is that we don't observe the kinds of changes that evolution requires for evolution to be true, and for all there to be this plethora of fundamentally different types of organisms. You know, a lion, a cheetah, a spider, a lizard, a bird, whatever type. These are dramatically different body plans with organs and anatomies. Okay,
Right.
If evolution were true, it has to change that, or you don't get any of that. We need a mechanism for that, and we need observable examples. Can you show us either?
Well, we don't directly observe those kinds of big changes, because those kinds of big changes require a much longer period of time than humans have been around, and certainly a much longer period of time since we've been keeping scientific records. Mm-hmm. But there is a very complete understanding of how the present diversity of life arose from the very beginning. I'm not a biologist. I can't recite it from memory, but you can easily look it up. And the evidence for it is that all of these transitional forms, which the transitional fossils actually do exist, they left evidence behind, and you can see that evidence in the fossil record.
Really?
Yes.
So why, if that's true, why is it that the world's most prominent scientists, let me screen share something with you. Can I screen share something, guys? If what you're saying is true, I understand that's the story that evolutionists give. I understand that. But the problem with that is that the most prominent scientists in the world have admitted the fossil record doesn't show any such thing. For example, it's not showing right now for some reason, my screen share. I don't understand why. Oh, wait a second. Shoot. Well, let's see now. Why is it not showing? Oh, I see. Okay, just one second. Okay, yeah. So, for example, Stephen Jay Gould has admitted at numerous times, so has Stephen Stanley, Niles Eldredge, the list goes on and on and on and on. He says, everybody knows that the fossil record doesn't provide much evidence for gradualism. It is full of gaps and discontinuities. Most species don't change. They get a little bigger, a little bumpier, but they remain the same species. The remarkable stasis has generally been ignored. If it doesn't agree with your ideas, you don't talk about it. The fossil record doesn't show the gradual change, and every paleontologist has known it since Cuvier. So these and many other statements like that are admissions. For example, David B. Kitts, professor of geology, University of Oklahoma, says, despite the bright promise that paleontology provides a means of seeing evolution, it has presented some nasty difficulties for evolutionists, the most notorious of which is the presence of gaps in the fossil record. Evolution requires intermediate form. Listen to this now. Evolution requires intermediate forms between species, and paleontology does not provide them. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you that evolutionists tell us this story all the time, that there are lots of transitional forms and the fossil record supports evolution, but that's just not true, because the most prominent scientists in the world have all admitted the fossil record does no such thing.
So you are badly misrepresenting Gould's position, which I happen to know a little bit about.
I'm just quoting him.
Oh, I know you're quoting him, but the argument that he was advancing was in no way meant to challenge evolutionary theory in general. It was meant to challenge gradualism in favor of punctuated equilibrium, which actually turned out to be an argument that won the day. Punctuated equilibrium is as far as I know, like I said, I'm not a biologist.
Right.
As far as I know, that argument actually carried the day.
And punctuated equilibrium is an excuse for the absence of transition in the fossil record. It's a story. It's another story. Evolution happened. This creature existed. Then we have that one over there. Poof, evolution took place somewhere in between. We just don't have the fossils to show it.
So can I do a screen share here?
That doesn't support the theory of evolution. It's an excuse for the absence of evidence of the theory.
Select window or screen.
When evolutionists talk about punctuated equilibrium, they might as well be admitting there's no evidence in the fossil record of transition.
So here is a list of transitional fossils that I found on Wikipedia. And it's really, really long. There are lots and lots and lots of them.
Right. The problem with that, Ron, is
you jump from the one creature to the one that's of a different design and claim it transitioned over there. We just don't have the transitions. This is what Gould and Eldredge and Kitts and many others are all admitting. Stephen Stanley, all of them are admitting we don't have the evidence that happened. What we have are creatures that are different, and we believe that one begat the other in a faster period, a shorter period of time than previously believed. That's why they're there. It's not an admission that either one of them is that there are any transitional forms. It's an admission we can't find them.
Okay, I think we're in an impasse here because I just showed you a long list of transitional fossils, and you're still saying there are no transitional fossils. So I'm sorry, I don't know how to get past that.
Well, I want you to understand my position about it. See, Gould stated that we don't see the evidence of transition in the fossil record. What we see is we have this creature, and this one, which we believe is evolutionary transition to it, and the ones in between is what we expect to find and don't. So all you're telling me when this list of transitional forms that you have is like pointing to one creature and saying it evolved into that one over there, which has a remarkably different anatomy.
and then saying it happened somehow, but we just don't have the physical evidence to it. And evolutionists point to the end result of that transition and claim that's the evidence itself, when it's actually an absence of evidence.
So I happen to know that there are other kinds of transitional fossils that do show gradualism. For mollusks happen to be the prime example. Let me see if I can find this.
So mollusks can be bigger or smaller, shaped a little more oblong, a little more circular.
Yep.
Okay. That, human beings have the same variety too, and there's no anatomical difference between any two humans on the planet. That's not evidence of transition. That's evidence that organisms don't reproduce looking exactly like each other. That doesn't show in any way that mollusks came into being from a non-mollusk, or that mollusks are becoming something non-mollusk. That's an argument against the theory. Because if all you have is the variety within a kind, you're not showing the transition to it or from it.
Yeah, we're going around in circles on this. The splitting of kinds into other kinds also happens gradually. And the large differences that we see between major classifications, those are the results of splits that happened many, many, many millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years ago. And so, and yes, a lot of those transitions may not have left fossil records, but a lot of them did. And I don't have that data off the top of my head, because like I said, I'm not a biologist, so I don't have that. If you want to go back to talking about information theory, that's more in my wheelhouse. Or if you want to give me a minute or two to do a little bit of impromptu research, I can find all this stuff. What I can say very confidently is that you are misrepresenting these quotes that you're mining. Were absolutely not intended to be construed as challenging the overall validity of evolution.
Well, I admit that, but all I'm pointing them out for is that they're admitting that creatures experience stasis so long as they're in the earth.
I happily concede that. That's absolutely true.
Well, and you just admitted that these things happen gradually. You used the word gradually, and so that's the problem. See, that's the problem. Pointing to a creature and saying this one evolved into that one, and then not being able to show the forms in between is why there are no transitional forms. Pointing to the one that you claim is evolved into that one and say this one evolved into that one doesn't show transition. That doesn't make that list from Wikipedia a transitional form. That just shows that you believe that this one, it begat that one over time. The gradual changes in between are unknown, and we don't even know of a mechanism for it. I mean,
that's simply not true. We do know of a mechanism.
Haven't they been studying mutation for about 90 years now, and nobody has observed mutation to cause a gradual structural design changes in living systems?
That's right, because the major structural design changes that you're referring to here happen very infrequently.
Punctuated genetic equilibrium.
That's right.
Right. But that's just an admission. We don't have the evidence for it, but it happened anyway. See, that's what evolution is, Ron. It's philosophy, but it's not physical evidence. It's not science. You have your story. You think that this creature begat that one over time. You can't show me the gradual changes that did it. You can't show me that mutations caused those gradual changes. No geneticist has ever published such a paper. And no paleontologist has shown a series of fossils that demonstrate one type of creature evolved into a fundamentally different type of creature with a change to anatomy. Don't have that either. The transitions in between, what you have is a story. This guy over here on the left, he begat that guy on the right. And where's the evidence for it? Well, it happened too fast. That's what we got. It's a story.
So let's go back then to the question of why, if this is just a story with no evidence to support it, do all these scientists buy into it? You advanced a hypothesis about that in your opening. You said that Darwin advanced this theory because he was angry at God.
I do believe that, yes.
Okay. So that explains why Darwin so first of all, it's Darwin anguished over whether or not to publish, precisely because he was still very religious and he recognized the challenge that evolution would pose to
oh, yes.
religious faith. And he was very reluctant to publish because of that.
Yes, he did. He understood the gravity of it. Yeah.
But that doesn't explain why he put the work into it.
Well, men are motivated by their heart, Ron. People are motivated to do all kinds of things by the heart. The heart's the most the human heart is the most complex, most deceitful, and dishonest thing that exists that God made. It's also the most beautiful thing that God made.
Yeah.
And so
your theory would actually make a prediction here, which is that Darwin's daughter died of cancer before he came up with the theory. Is that true?
He, I believe, was heart-stricken because of his daughter's suffering, and he could not posit how a loving, merciful God would create a world that included disease and suffering, and therefore how his daughter would suffer. He anguished over that.
Mm-hmm.
It really rocked his soul. And I believe it rocked his faith. And he was angry at God and willing to put forth this theory. A lot of people have this false belief that Charles Darwin came to believe in evolution because of the species he collected while he was in the Galapagos Islands on his voyage on the Beagle. That's not true. When he stepped off the Beagle, he was still a creationist. He was beguiled by Charles Lyell and Thomas Huxley and taken under their wing, and they spoke to him. And Charles Lyell convinced Darwin, if you publish on this idea of evolution, that there's a common ancestor, that you'll become famous. Charles Darwin swallowed the idea, and the motivation of his broken heart over his daughter was the thing that helped motivate him towards going.
Okay, let's suppose I grant all that. It doesn't explain why all the other scientists accepted it and why they continue to accept it now.
Well, people, I think as a Christian, I think the answer is very simple. It's the same reason that when you talk to a Hindu and explain to her there is but one God and there are no other gods, and he made a way for you to be with him in paradise, they reject it and say, no, that can't be true. And like when I spoke to a Hindu lady a couple of months ago and attempted to witness to her, I got her into a philosophical conversation about her religion, and she said to me, no, all gods are the same. They're all the same God. Brahma, Shiva, Shiva, Vishnu, these are all the one God, and your God, Jesus Christ, he's the same God, and Allah is the same God. They were just alluding that these are all one God wearing different masks, but that would make God a deceiver.
Okay,
because but that theory is one gospel to one people, and wearing a different mask, he's lied to other people and said, "This is how you find eternal paradise."
That theory is also not consistent with the evidence, because Catholics are not creationists. At least they're not Young Earth Creationists.
Well, I was trying to point out that people, the human heart is very stubborn, and people who don't want something to be true will fight it tooth and nail and look for any reason not to believe something. That's the point I was trying to make. And so you can even have theists who believe in evolution for one reason or another. I could describe what I think is the reason why you have Christians that believe and fight for evolution theory. It has something to do with something they're not willing to believe. And I don't really want to go into it, but I mean, if you
I want to hear this. I really want to hear this.
I don't think that they really like the idea that they deserve the punishment that Jesus Christ took on the cross, and they want to distance themselves from the cross of Jesus Christ, because it's the most personal thing possible. If the Creator himself becomes a man and pays the penalty, suffers for your sin, there's nothing more personal than that, than the God himself becoming flesh and paying the penalty for your sin. They don't want to believe that they are worthy of destruction by God. I am too good for that. God wouldn't do that to me. I don't deserve. Okay, I've done wrong things, but God wouldn't put me in hell for my sin. That's a ridiculous thing. I'm too good for that. So they think that because of that, they're too good for that. Now, if evolution is true, they're just an organism like any other, and they're not so unique that God would come down from his throne, become a man, and pay the penalty in the flesh of a man for the man's sin. See, he didn't do that for marsupials. He didn't do it for kangaroos. He didn't do it for lizards. He did it for man in the form of a man. That is what makes it so personal. That means if he did that for them, they deserve what Jesus endured on the cross. They don't really like that idea. And so
Okay.
they want to believe they're nothing more than an animal.
I've talked to an awful lot of Christians in my life. I have never met one who denied what you say that these Christians are denying. I've
That's
never
my
met one
personal
that
opinion, Ron. That's all. That's my opinion as to why there are Christians who believe in evolution and fight for it.
okay, but the topic of this debate.
There are others that have a different reason, I think, but I think that's a prominent one.
Okay, but so you're conceding then that this opinion of yours is not supported by the evidence?
No, I didn't say that at all.
Okay, then I'll go back to where are these supposed Christians who don't believe that God came to earth in the flesh? Because I've met a lot of Christians. I've never met one who professed to believe this.
Well, there's plenty of them. Mormons are people who call themselves Christians and don't believe it. Jehovah's Witnesses believe Jesus is just another God, one of many. I mean, and there are Christians who say that Jesus was just a created being. He was a man, and God made him pay the penalty for our sins, which cannot be true according to the New Testament or Old Testament. That just cannot be true. And so, yeah, there are Christians. There are not tons of them, but there are Christians who believe that Jesus was just a mortal man and not God in the flesh. I've debated a couple dozen of them over the years, and in Pal Talk and on Discord.
Okay, so you and I can agree then that Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, they're minority fringe beliefs, and arguably not even Christians at all.
Well, there are also Protestant Christians who believe that. I think who argue. I mean, I've known and debated with Protestant Christians who say Jesus is just a created being and a mortal man and not God in the flesh. Unfortunately, there are some.
Okay, I've never met any of them, but
I don't believe you have to believe that to believe that in evolution and being a creation, a Christian. What the point I was trying to make is they don't want to believe that that Christ paid the penalty for their sin. They want to believe that Christ paid the penalty for sin, not specifically mine, just sin in general. See,
that seems like a pretty fine hair to split to me.
I think it is splitting hairs. That's what they're doing.
And it seems very unconvincing to me as an explanation for why there are so many of them who accept evolution. Because if there really is if the evidence isn't there, wanting to believe in some fine theological point, that's a very weird reason to reject all this data. But I can certainly see it being the other way. I can certainly understand why somebody could reject the data in favor of wanting to believe that the Bible is true, because if you don't do that, you run into all kinds of other theological problems. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons why I have a grudging respect for Young Earth Creationists, because they're more intellectually honest about this than other Christians. But it as an explanation for why it is such an overwhelming consensus. When I say overwhelming, I mean like 99% of biologists accept evolution.
Yeah, I don't think appeals to consensus or replace scientific evidence. That's the word for me. I'll tell you what I think is bizarre. I think believing that random damage events called mutations design structural, functional features of living things, which are complex and functional to the molecular scale in a way that is absolutely mind-bendingly interdependent and complex, and that enough of those damage events is going to produce a land-dwelling creature from the fish. I believe that's a bizarre way to believe, because we don't have the scientific evidence that mutations do any such thing. All we have is a list as long as your arm is printed in super fine print of diseases caused by random mutations.
In terms of how land-dwelling animals came from fish, we actually have evidence for that in an extant living creature. There are these things called lungfish that are fish that can live. They're actually fish. They have gills, but they can actually crawl out onto the land and walk around. They're
but
literally, you have videos of them on YouTube.
Right, they're living fossils, and that destroys their ability to be transitional forms. They exist.
No, it doesn't.
Well, let me explain why. They exist in the fossil record. They find them in the fossil record at X depth. Then they go up through the geologic column. They're still there, millions of years later, still there, right to the present, still there. Guess what? No change.
That's right.
Lungfish are what's called a living fossil. There's no evidence of them coming from creatures that were not lungfish or evolving creatures that were not lungfish evolving from them. They're a living fossil. Living fossils provide an argument against evolution, not for it. The mud skippers are the same. I've heard many evolutionists say, well, mud skippers, look, the creatures are evolving out of. No, mud skippers were created in the beginning. How do we know? They don't change. We have them in the fossil record 230 million years ago. They're still the same. No change. So 230 years of mutation and natural selection and no change. Now, I know the evolutionists are going to say, well, that's because they fit their ecological niche so well.
That's exactly right.
Right. But the problem with that is the Earth's environment's constantly changing. And it wouldn't matter anyway.
But not the environment where the lungfish live.
It wouldn't matter anyway. There's no evidence of transition. It's just they exist. They haven't changed. That's all. It's not showing that evolution made them. Doesn't show that at all. It's an absence of evidence, not evidence for the theory. There just isn't any scientific reason to believe in evolution. I find it bizarre that people are so dogmatically in defense of it.
I just wanted to jump in real quick, gentlemen. It's been a really, really good discussion. We've also got a lot of good questions that I think is going to lead into some more good back and forth. But I put 40 minutes on the clock. The 40 minutes is up, but I don't want to just stop you guys in mid-conversation. How much more time do you guys want for the discussion?
I feel like we've kind of come to a good place to stop, actually, because we're starting to go around in circles.
Okay, yeah. And I've been in enough debates to know that, you can only do so much before you start getting a bit tired. And so why don't... let's do this since you guys.
If you want to move to questions, Ron, that's cool with me. I'm happy with that.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Did you guys want to take a minute each to kind of wrap up your thoughts and give your final points or anything like that before question and answers to wrap things up? You guys can take a minute if you want.
If Ron wants to give a concluding statement, then I'll give one too. Otherwise, we can just go into questions. It's up to Ron.
Let's just go to questions.
Okay, let's do it. And the audience had a really good time. You guys kept it respectful, fun, with a lot of good topics. You guys kind of bounced off each other. So lots of good questions from the audience. Let me see. I collected them all here. I just got to find them. Sometimes with the super chats, it's a statement, but typically a statement to somebody. Therefore, if you guys want to reply to it, you can. The way I like to do the Q&A is if you guys have a bit of a back and forth on a question, I think the fairest way to end it would be whoever the question was for would ultimately get the last word on it, if that works for you guys.
Fine with me.
Okay, let's go. So we've got Coco Puffer with $5 super chat. Thank you so much. He says 84% of the world believes in a creator. Almost all of the founders of modern science believed in a creator. I'd say the majority opinion is that God did it. That sounds like it's more towards you, Ron, if you wanted to respond.
Yeah, so that's true. When I say 99%, that figure is the number of people who are actually studying this for a living and who are therefore in the best position to know what the evidence actually is. Like I said, I don't know. I'm not a biologist. I'm fairly confident that if you had a biologist on here, they could just recite off the top of their head what the evidence for the transitional fossils are, and how the specific person who discovered the specific fossil that shows the lungfish branching here and there. That's not my wheelhouse, so I can't really speak to that. If you want to give me 5 minutes to go do some research, I could probably find it, but this is live TV, so we can't really do that. Neph, if you want to do a rematch, I'll be happy to go do some more homework on that, so I'm a little better prepared on that.
I'm happy to debate you in the future.
But I will always come back to the people who are in the best position to know overwhelmingly come to the conclusion that evolution is true. So there are two explanations on the table for why this is. One is that the evidence shows that it's true. And the other is that they have some ulterior theological motive. They don't want to admit that Jesus died on the cross or something like that, which we could test that hypothesis.
That's not what I said, that Jesus didn't die on the cross.
I'm sorry if I misrepresented what you said, but it was some theological theory which I didn't understand well enough to be able to reproduce. But whatever it is, if we discuss it, we can come to a common understanding of what that hypothesis is. And then we can go test it by, for example, asking some biologists if they believe this thing that you predict that they will believe. And this is actually how science works. So you put an alternative hypothesis out there. You reason to see what predictions this alternative hypothesis makes, and then you do the experiment to see if these predictions bear themselves out. And I'd be more than happy to go through that process. I think it would be a worthwhile exercise.
Okay, next question. We've got a super chat from SWE. Thank you so much. Question is for you, Neph. So the question is, can you give an example of unspecified information? Go ahead, Neph.
Unspecified information. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. Unless you consider Shannon information to be information, it doesn't constitute specified information. Shannon information is statistical analysis about data. It's not actually, it doesn't qualify as prescriptive, specified information. It's not the kind of information we typically use in our day-to-day lives. And it doesn't, it can't be employed in the theory of evolution. Shannon information won't support the theory of evolution. So off the top of my head, I can't give an example of non-specified information, except to mention that Shannon information is called information.
Okay, thanks for that response there, Neph. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that there, Ron?
We didn't really get into the technical details of this, so this might be a little unfair, but I will throw this out there. Shannon information is, in fact, the only kind of information that there is. There's no such thing as prescriptive information. It's all Shannon information. It's the only coherent theory of information that's ever been put out there. And the information that's in DNA is Shannon information, can be understood in terms of Shannon information theory and the theory of computation. But that's a whole nother topic, which maybe we should reconvene and focus on one day.
Ron, you might want to while you're doing your research, you might want to educate yourself about the science papers that have been published in the journal for the last 15 years, that DNA is complex, specified information not published by creationists, but by evolutionists.
Send me the references.
Okay, so I've got a good list of questions here, actually, that I'm looking through them, because there's probably 50% for Ron, 50% for Neph, so this is good. We'll go to one for Ron now here. Question from Basement Dweller. Is Ron going to grab a few examples from that mountain of evidence? In other words, I guess what would be one or two of the best examples that you would point to off the cuff, Ron? Go ahead.
Oh boy. No, I'm sorry. I nothing jumps out at me as there's just so much of it, and it all plays together into one coherent, unified whole that I can't offhand just point to one thing as the star of the show. No, I'm sorry, I can't.
That's no problem. Let's go to, okay, let's see. We've got, okay, this one's for you, Neph, so that's fair. We'll go one for Ron, then one for Neph. So this one's in the form of a super chat from SWE. Again, thank you so much. Let's see. We do see structural changes, she says. Structural analysis of nylon-eating bacteria shows that the nylon oligomer hydrolase evolved by gene duplication from D common antecedent located on the same plasmid. Whoa, a lot of big words there, but Neph,
Okay, so the ability of the bacteria who become called nylonase to digest nylon is a biochemical change. It's not a structural design change to the bacteria. It doesn't move the bacteria one tiny iota towards becoming something fundamentally different. It's still a bacteria. Has every one of its same physical features. Nothing new arises in the design of the bacteria, except a chemical. A change to enzymes. So the bacteria was able to produce a novel enzyme that would break down nylon. But that doesn't change the structural design of the bacteria at all. All it does is demonstrate an incredible amount of intelligence in the design of bacteria, that its system is able to build an enzyme on the fly that makes it able to digest nylon. But it doesn't change the structural design of the bacteria one iota. And since it doesn't, it's not evolutionary change, and therefore it doesn't support the theory of evolution.
I actually just thought of a really beautiful data point. I just remembered this. A long time ago, I saw this on a TV show on PBS. You think about fish that have scales and birds that have feathers. Would you consider the transition from scales to feathers a structural design change?
I would consider that if anybody could show a logical reason to believe that scales could evolve into feathers, they'd have something to argue for.
Okay, so if you look at penguins, they have feathers because they're birds, but on their wings, which are more like fins than wings because penguins don't fly and they spend most of their time in the water, the structure of the feathers on their wings, as you approach the leading edge of the wing, they get smaller and smaller and denser and start to look more and more like scales, because they're aquatic birds and they evolved the same structure as fish did in order to move through the water efficiently.
So they get denser, and you're alluding that makes them look like scales. I think you're employing your imagination. They're feathers.
They are feathers, but they're structurally, they have changed their shape to look and function like scales.
They don't function like scales.
They do.
They seal water out when they're coiced properly, but so do feathers on birds.
I think Neff gets the last word on this.
Yeah, yes. Thanks for keeping it fair and fun, gentlemen. Let's see. So Mitchell, super chat just came in for Ron, since we just had one for Neff. Since you appeal to consensus to justify your conclusions, would it be fair to say you'd be against Galileo and Kepler in their era? Go ahead.
So I want to be clear that I'm not appealing to consensus as proof that evolution is true. I'm saying that it's quite possible that evolution is wrong despite the consensus. But if you want to argue that that's the case, and I'm perfectly willing to admit that it's a possibility, you have to explain how the majority got it wrong. And in the case of Kepler and Galileo, it's very easy to explain. They didn't have the data. On the data that they had available to them at the time, the heliocentric model and the Ptolemaic model is quite defensible. In fact, it's superior to the heliocentric model. And it's not until you had better telescopes available that you could start to get the kind of precise data that you needed in order to demonstrate that the heliocentric model was superior. In fact, the heliocentric model is in some sense wrong too. It's not that the Earth revolves around the sun. That's not some kind of absolute truth. It's just that that's a better approximation to the truth than the idea that the sun revolves around the Earth. In fact, they both revolve around the common center of gravity. And in fact, even that's not true because our solar system is moving through the galaxy. And so, depending on the level of detail and precision that you want, things get more and more complex and nuanced.
Okay, thanks for that response there. Ron, Brother Neff, we have a follow-up from SWE. How is it not a structural change in bacteria? The genes literally duplicated. So it sounds like more of a question regarding gene duplication.
Okay. That doesn't change the structural design of the bacteria at all. That changes the structure of the DNA, not the organism's anatomy. An anatomical change is necessary if evolution were true. You must have it. Can you screen share something with me real quick? I just want to show Ron something. He asked for a source for something.
Why don't you email it to me?
Okay, I could send you.
Because I do want to read those papers, but
okay.
Screen sharing with me is pointless. You have to email it to me so that I can download them and read them after we're done here.
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So bacteria gaining an immunity or the ability to digest nylon, they don't change the structural design of the organism. They can modify the information package that prescribes the organism's design without changing the design, and that's all that happens.
Okay, thanks for the responses. Great responses there, gentlemen, from the both of you. This one is Super Chat, $25 from Alec Cox. Thank you so much, Alec. As I always say, you're putting my kids through college. So let's see. Ask Ron. So this one's for you, Ron. Why do you think that your pet could become something other than what you bought? That's deception and fraud. Just like pseudoscience evolution, is it not? So he's coming at you, Ron. Therefore, you have the opportunity to respond.
All right. Well, I will respond in kind. I don't believe what you say that I believe, and so you're the one who's misrepresenting my position. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks so much. Let's see. We've got so many questions here. Let's go to, so now we're going to you, Neph. So SWE's coming at you. So this is a fun Q&A, lively audience today. You guys brought the numbers. So let's see. Question for Neph. You can see the whale blowhole, it says how, but I'm guessing hole, move from how the nose to the top of the head in both the fossil record and in embryonic development. Go ahead, Neph.
We don't see that. The transitional form that allegedly showed that was called Rhodocetus, and it was an example of scientific fraud perpetrated by a scientist named Gingrich. When the full creature was discovered, it had no blowhole or fluke tail, as in the models that he had built up and put in public schools and sent around to indoctrinate children and put in museums of natural history. They don't have that. And here's a reason we can know that that idea is completely absurd. Imagine the blowhole, the nostrils of a creature merging into one to become a blowhole, then migrating up the skull across the top of the head to the back to the top of the head where it becomes a blowhole. Does that mean that those air passages passed right down the middle of the brain of that animal? How does that work? Or did they magically split? Say, guys, we're going to have to go left and right. You guys go that way, and I'm going to split, and I'll go that way, and we'll meet up around the back of the brain. See, how does that work? Well, it's just not logical. And certainly isn't logical to believe that random mutations and natural selection could produce something like that. So the idea of the blowhole migrating up the skull past the brain to the back of the brain on the top of the skull is a preposterous idea. This is one of the beautiful things about evolution's the ridiculous theory of evolution that demonstrates it's a kiddie story and nothing more.
Did you want to respond to that, Ron, or move on to your question?
No, I want to respond to that because there's actually another beautiful example to contradict this, and that is the hippopotamus, which is an animal that's in the process of transitioning from being a land mammal to being an aquatic mammal. It's kind of halfway in between the two states right now, and in its current state of evolution, its nostrils have moved up to the top of its head, but they're still in the front. They haven't quite moved all the way back the way they have in whales. But again, this is a process that you can see happening before your very eyes.
Well, we can see that the location of the nostrils is slightly different from one variety of hippopotamus from another. We don't see any migration of them.
Haven't waited long enough.
Well, that's your story. That's your imagination. Now, that's not physical evidence. See, that's not science. That's what you believe happened over millions of years ago, long ago and far away.
Okay, great back and forth, guys. This has been a lot of fun. We got another $25 super chat from Alec Cox. Once again, it's for you, Ron. He says, ask Ron to explain ATP/ADP cell respiration without glucose C6H1206. Also, the Krebs cycle. Glucose does not form itself. Like protein can be broken down to glucose, but glucose cannot make a protein. I hope I read that correctly, but Ron, however you'd like to respond.
My response is the same as it is to all questions of this sort. I don't know how many times I have to repeat this. I'm not a biologist. If you want to know the answer to a question like that, go find a biologist and ask them. I'm sure they will have an answer, even despite the fact that I don't off the top of my head know what it is.
In Ron's defense, I would say that question was a little too technical to be asking anybody in a debate. If they had already spoken about that subject in detail, then it might be fair to ask it.
Yeah, if you want to ask me anything about information theory or genetic entropy, fire away. But biology is not my area of expertise. My biology education ended in high school.
Actually, good thing you mentioned that. We got a lot more people in the chat that weren't here at the beginning. So quick shout out to Dr. Garret, who will be back with us next Thursday, 2 p.m. EST, to debate the topic of genetic entropy with Paul Price, speaker from CMI. So we're looking forward to that one. Let me sift through these questions and see. So I guess that one was for you there, Ron. So let's get a tough one for Neph. Neph, question from Iron Charioteer. So he's coming at you. He says, ask Neph, where did the iridium and micro diamond layer in the KTP or KT boundary come from? Sorry, go ahead, Neph.
Well, the simple answer is likely from inside the Earth. During the Noahic flood, a lot of material was ejected from inside the Earth by massive quantities of water erupting from the ocean floors at the mid-oceanic ridges, and which run around the Earth like the seam of a baseball. And hot water is still coming out all along them in the form of black smokers called hydrothermal vents. So likely the iridium was inside the Earth, dumped out onto the Earth during the flood of Noah, and because it happened at a specific point during the flood, it's found only in certain strata, largely in certain strata. As for the diamonds, micro diamonds, that's probably because diamonds, massive quantities of large diamonds exploded as they were coming to the surface. Scientists have calculated that diamonds, are believed to have formed deep inside the Earth, and they had come up because of geological activity. They're brought to near the surface or much closer to it. And the problem is that if a diamond is brought up from the great depths of the Earth too quickly, it shatters. If it comes up too slowly, you won't form a diamond at all. So defined to micro diamonds implicates catastrophic event during the Noahic flood, wherein diamonds, which were created by heat and pressure inside the Earth during the Noahic flood by catastrophic plate tectonics, were brought to the surface too quickly and literally shattered. And that's why we have micro diamonds.
Okay, great answer there, Neph. Ron, did you want to respond at all?
No, I'm not a geologist either. Although, if you don't mind, I would like to ask the question that I think this questioner should have asked.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Ron.
Which is related to that, which is why have human remains and artifacts never been found in the same strata as, well, let's just say dinosaurs?
Well, for the same reason that we don't find an Apatosaurus in the same strata as a T-Rex. Just didn't happen that way.
It just didn't happen that way. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, evolutionists believe lots of creatures coexisted, but aren't found in many cases in the very same strata. So we can turn that question right around and ask it of the evolutionists. So I'd say the question is it's loaded at the very least, and I think it's a fallacious one.
Okay. Well, maybe we can take this up if we have a rematch.
Also, expecting to find a human being in the same strata as a dinosaur because they coexisted is like looking for a needle in a haystack. Good luck with that.
Okay, and you're right. That would be a good topic for a future debate. So let's go. We got a question from Life is Precious for Ron. What would falsify the theory of evolution in genetics? Go ahead.
I don't know what the questioner means by in genetics. But there are a lot of things that would falsify it in general, starting with finding human remains and dinosaur remains in the same strata. That would definitely do it.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. Neff, did you want a quick response to that before we get on to the next one?
I think finding a fossil verifies the Noahic flood and kills evolution theory. You can't get a fossil by any other means.
And last word goes to you, Ron.
I'll defer to Neff on that.
Awesome. Sorry to put you guys on the spot sometimes. Okay, so boom, right to Neff now. Lots of good questions from the audience, so thanks so much, guys. Luca asked Neff, give us an example of a transitional form, one that you would recognize as one. Go ahead.
I can't do that because I don't know what a transitional form looks like. I've never seen one. Nobody has. And so, I mean, these things are conjured in the imagination. I would say if you want to know what a transitional form looks like, envision the fossils that don't exist between one type of living thing and another and come up with whatever willy-nilly imaginative scenario you have. And there's your transitional form.
Would you like a response there, Ron?
No, I'm starting to run out of steam.
No problem. You know, well, I'll pick out two more out of this bunch of questions. Like I said, you guys bring the numbers, so this has been a lot of fun. So let's. This one's a super chat, so I'll ask this one. Dwayne Burke, thanks so much for the super chat. He says chemistry came from alchemy, which came from occultism, which came from fallen angels, which came from God. Research the history of chemistry. I'm not sure if that's specifically for anybody, but if you guys would like to respond.
I got nothing.
I don't know. What do you say? You know, I don't think God said, hey, Noah, check this out. Look what I can do with chlorine. I just don't think it happened that way.
Okay, let's do, okay, here's the last question that we will do. This one is from Bill Morgan. Thank you for the question, Bill. Question is for Ron. What evolved first in humans, lungs or hearts?
Both lungs and hearts had evolved long time before humans evolved.
Okay, a quick response from you there, Neff, at all before we...
No such feature as that could be produced by evolution. That's all I'd say.
Okay, well, like I said, this one's been a lot of fun. Flew by. We're going on a couple hours now, so I know it's probably getting around dinner time for everybody. So let's. I'm going to leave it up to the debaters for some final words. If you want to plug in your channels or something you're doing, then go ahead. Thanks for being here. We can start with you, Ron. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Neff, I got to say, I was really impressed. You know your stuff. You kept me on my toes. And I would love to do this again.
I've enjoyed this debate, Ron, and I would like to debate you again at some point in the future. We could specify a more specific topic than just a general evolution versus creation, if you like.
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Sounds fun.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank the debaters, of course. You guys are the energy of any debate channel for that matter. So thanks so much for giving us your time. And it's been a wild one. It's been really fun and enjoyable to listen to. So I'll hand it over to Praise, our amazing producer, to shut her down for the day. Thanks so much, guys. And thanks again to the live chat for some